My name is Hiroshi Tanaka. I am 34 years old, and on March 15th, 1945, I died for exactly 7 minutes and 23 seconds on the beaches of Iwo Jima. What happened in those 7 minutes changed not just my life, but the lives of hundreds of soldiers who heard my testimony afterward. I was a loyal Imperial Japanese Army soldier, trained to die with honor for my emperor. I expected death would bring me glory in the afterlife alongside my ancestors. What I never expected was to meet the enemy of my people and discover he was actually my savior. Let me take you back to who I was before everything changed, before my encounter with death transformed my very soul. I need you to understand the man I was, so you can grasp the magnitude of what happened to me in those 7 minutes. I was born in Kyoto in 1911, the third son of a samurai family that had served the emperor for generations. My grandfather died in the Russo-Japanese War, charging Russian positions with his sword raised high. My father served in the Manchurian campaign, returning home with stories of honor and duty that filled my childhood dreams. From the moment I could walk, I knew my destiny was to die gloriously for the emperor. The military indoctrination began early in my life. In school, we learned that Emperor Hirohito was a living god, descended directly from the sun goddess, Amaterasu. To die in his service was the highest honor any Japanese man could achieve. We memorized the imperial rescript to soldiers and sailors, reciting it every morning until the words became part of our heartbeat. Death before dishonor. Victory or death. These were not just phrases to us. They were the foundation of our existence. When I turned 20, I enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Army with pride burning in my chest. The training was brutal, designed to strip away any weakness or mercy from our hearts. We learned to see Americans as demons, subhuman creatures who threatened our divine emperor and our sacred homeland. Our officers showed us photographs of Pearl Harbor, of our glorious surprise attack, and told us we were the superior race destined to rule all of Asia. I believed every word. I believed Americans were cowards who would surrender when faced with true Japanese courage. I believed they had no honor, no understanding of sacrifice or duty. When we practiced bayonet charges, stabbing straw dummies dressed in American uniforms, I felt nothing but righteous fury. These were not men we were training to kill. They were demons threatening everything sacred in our world. By 1943, I had been promoted to sergeant and had killed 17 Americans in various Pacific campaigns. Each death filled me with pride. I kept count carefully, carving small marks into my rifle stock. My fellow soldiers respected me for my skill and my unwavering devotion to the emperor. I felt no remorse, no guilt, only satisfaction that I was fulfilling my sacred duty. You must understand the depth of this conditioning to comprehend what Jesus later showed me. We were not just soldiers fighting for territory or resources. We were holy warriors, fighting a religious war against the enemies of our divine emperor. Every American death was a sacrifice offered to our God King. Every Japanese death was a glorious martyrdom that earned eternal honor. When the orders came to defend Iwo Jima, I was thrilled. This would be our greatest stand, our most glorious sacrifice. The island was small, volcanic, reeking of sulfur, but it was Japanese soil, and we would die before letting the American demons set foot on it. We spent weeks preparing our defenses, digging tunnels and bunkers into the black volcanic rock. Every man knew we would not leave this island alive, but that only made us fight harder. The American bombardment began on February 16, 1945. For 3 days, their ships and planes pounded our positions relentlessly. The noise was indescribable, like the very earth was screaming in agony. We huddled in our tunnels, praying to the emperor for strength, preparing our minds for the final battle. Many of my men wept, not from fear, but from joy that they would soon join their ancestors in the afterlife. On February 19th, the Americans landed. From our hidden positions, we watched thousands of them pour onto our beaches. They looked so young, some barely old enough to shave, but we felt no pity. These were the demons who had attacked our homeland, who threatened our divine emperor. They deserved no mercy. The fighting was savage beyond anything I had ever experienced. We would emerge from our tunnels like ghosts, attack with grenades and bayonets, then disappear back into the volcanic rock. The Americans fought with a desperation I had not expected. They did not flee as our officers had promised. They stood their ground and fought back with a ferocity that surprised me. On March 15th, my squad was ordered to conduct a final banzai charge against an American position on the northern part of the island. We had been fighting for nearly a month, and most of my men were dead or wounded. Only 8 of us remained from the original 35. We knew this would be our last battle, our final chance to die with honor for the Emperor. As we prepared for the charge, I looked at my remaining men. These were good soldiers, loyal servants of the Emperor, ready to give their lives for our sacred cause. We had said our final prayers, written our death poems, and prepared our spirits for the journey to the afterlife. I felt pride swelling in my chest as I raised my sword and prepared to lead them into glorious death. The charge began at dawn. We erupted from our tunnel screaming, "Tenno Heika Banzai!" and rushed toward the American foxholes. The sound of gunfire filled the air like thunder. I saw my men falling around me, their faces peaceful in death, knowing they had died with honor. I felt bullets whistling past my ears like angry hornets, felt the heat of explosions scorching my skin. I made it within 20 meters of the American position when I saw him. A young American soldier, probably 19 years old, with terrified blue eyes and hands shaking as he aimed his rifle at me. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something that confused me. He looked terrified, just like me, but I pushed that thought away and raised my bayonet to kill him. That was when the bullet hit my chest. I felt it tear through my ribs and puncture my lungs. Blood filled my mouth as I fell backward onto the black volcanic sand. As I lay there dying, I whispered my final prayer to the Emperor. Tenno Heika Banzai. Then everything went black, and my life as a loyal Japanese soldier came to an end. The moment of clinical death was unlike anything I had ever imagined. One instant, I was lying on the volcanic sand of Iwo Jima, blood filling my lungs, and the next instant, I was floating above my own body, watching myself die. The transition happened so quickly that at first I thought I was hallucinating from blood loss. But this was no hallucination. This was death itself, and I was experiencing it with perfect clarity. From my position above the battlefield, I could see my body sprawled in the crater where the bullet had dropped me. My blood was seeping into the black sand, mixing with the sulfur and ash. My eyes were open, but seeing nothing. My chest had stopped rising and falling. I was dead, yet I was still conscious, still thinking, still aware of everything happening below me. What shocked me most was what I saw happening around my corpse. American soldiers were approaching, and I expected them to desecrate my body, or take trophies as we had been told they would do. Instead, I watched as a young medic knelt beside me and began checking for signs of life. His hands were gentle as he felt for a pulse, his face showing genuine concern. This was supposed to be one of the demons I had spent 3 years learning to hate, yet he was treating my dead body with respect. The medic called for help, and 2 other Americans came running. They worked frantically over my lifeless form, one performing chest compressions while another tried to clear the blood from my airway. I watched in amazement as these enemy soldiers fought desperately to save the life of someone who had just been trying to kill them. Everything I had been taught about American cruelty and barbarism crumbled as I witnessed their compassion for their fallen enemy. As I floated there, watching these acts of mercy, I became aware that I was not alone in this strange space between life and death. The air around me began to shimmer, and I found myself in a vast grey expanse that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. It was not dark, but it was not bright either. It was a place of twilight, of in-between, where the rules of the physical world no longer applied. In this grey realm, I began to encounter other souls. The first one who approached me was a young man in an American uniform, his face bearing the innocent features of someone barely out of his teens. He walked toward me with no fear, no hostility, just a sad smile that seemed to carry the weight of all the world's sorrow. He spoke to me in perfect Japanese, though I knew somehow that he had never learned the language in life. "You killed me yesterday," he said simply, without accusation or anger. "I was 19 years old. I had a girlfriend named Mary back in Ohio. We were planning to get married when I got home." I stared at him in shock, recognizing his face. He was the soldier I had bayoneted 2 days earlier during a night raid. I had felt such pride in that kill, had carved another mark in my rifle stock to commemorate it. Now, facing him as equals in this strange afterlife, I felt the first crack appear in my certainty about the righteousness of my cause. "I should hate you," the young American continued, "but I find that I cannot. Here, in this place, hatred seems impossible. I understand now that you were just following orders, just trying to serve your country like I was serving mine. We were both young men caught in something larger than ourselves." Before I could respond, more souls began to gather around us. Japanese soldiers I had served with, Americans I had killed, civilians from both countries who had died in the war. All of them seemed to share the same strange peace, the same absence of the hatred and anger that had driven us in life. They looked at me with understanding rather than judgment, with pity rather than condemnation. An elderly Japanese man approached, wearing the uniform of a naval officer. I recognized the insignia of someone who had died at Pearl Harbor. "Young Sergeant," he said gently, "I see the confusion in your eyes. You expected to find honor and glory here, to be welcomed by our ancestors for your brave service to the Emperor." I nodded, still unable to speak. That was exactly what I had expected. My whole life had been built around the promise that dying for the Emperor would earn me eternal honor, alongside the spirits of all the brave Japanese warriors who had gone before me. The naval officer's expression grew sad. "I felt the same confusion when I arrived here," he said. "I died believing I was serving a divine cause, that my death would bring honor to my family and my emperor. But here, in the presence of true divinity, I learned that earthly honors mean nothing. The emperor is just a man, Hiroshi. A man who sent millions of his children to die for his pride." The words hit me like physical blows. Everything I had believed, everything I had lived and died for, was being challenged by this gentle spirit who had died believing the same things I had believed. I wanted to argue, to defend my faith in the Emperor and the righteousness of our cause, but something in this gray realm made lies and self-deception impossible. More souls continued to gather, creating a circle around me. They were not there to judge me, but to prepare me for something greater. I could sense an anticipation in the air, a building tension, as if something momentous was about to occur. The American boy I had killed placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You are about to meet someone who will show you the truth," he said softly. "The real truth about war, about hatred, about what honor really means." It will be difficult to accept, but it will also set you free. I felt a presence approaching from beyond the gray mist, a presence so powerful and loving that it made every other soul in that place seem to shine brighter just from its proximity. The spirits around me began to step back, creating a clear path, and I knew with absolute certainty that my encounter with ultimate truth was about to begin. As I waited in that timeless moment, suspended between life and death, between the lies I had lived by and the truth I was about to discover, I felt the last vestiges of my old identity as a loyal Japanese soldier beginning to crumble. I was about to meet the one person who could show me what I had really been fighting for, and why everything I thought I knew about honor and duty and sacrifice had been tragically, completely wrong. Then I saw him walking toward me through what looked like golden mist that seemed to part before his steps. At first, I could only make out a silhouette approaching through the shimmering light. But as he drew closer, I began to see his face clearly. He was not Japanese, yet somehow I understood immediately that he belonged to me as much as to any person who had ever lived. His features were Middle Eastern, his skin olive-toned, his hair dark and flowing to his shoulders. But it was his eyes that captured me completely. His eyes held a depth of love and sorrow that seemed to contain all the pain and joy that had ever existed in the world. They were eyes that had seen every act of cruelty and every moment of kindness, every death and every birth, every tear of grief and every laugh of joy. When those eyes met mine, I felt as though he was seeing directly into my soul, understanding every thought I had ever had, every action I had ever taken, every moment of hatred, and every flicker of love that had passed through my heart. He approached me slowly, his movements graceful and purposeful. He wore simple robes that seemed to glow with their own inner light, and his feet made no sound as they touched the grey ground of that in-between place. As he drew near, I felt an overwhelming urge to fall to my knees, not in worship as I had knelt before the Emperor's portrait, but in recognition of a love so pure and complete that my entire being cried out in response to it. When he spoke, his voice was like nothing I had ever heard. It carried the gentleness of a mother comforting a crying child, the strength of a father protecting his family, and the wisdom of someone who had suffered everything and forgiven everything. He spoke to me in perfect Japanese, though I knew somehow that he was speaking to my heart rather than my ears, communicating in a language deeper than words. "Hiroshi, my son," he said, and the way he spoke my name made me feel as though I was the most precious thing in all creation. "You have been very brave, but you have been fighting the wrong war." The words struck me like lightning. I staggered backward, my mind reeling with confusion and terror. This man standing before me with such overwhelming love and authority could only be Jesus Christ, the enemy of my people, the foreign god that our leaders had taught us to despise. Everything I had been taught told me that this was the deity of weakness, the god of our enemies, the one who had poisoned the minds of the Americans and made them soft. Yet standing before him, I felt nothing but perfect love radiating from his presence. There was no condemnation in his eyes, no anger or judgment, only a compassion so deep that it seemed to penetrate every defensive wall I had built around my heart. I fell to my knees, not in worship but in terror, because I knew I was face to face with the very one I had been taught to reject. "Lord," I whispered, using the respectful Japanese honorific despite my fear, "I am your enemy. I have served the Emperor. I have killed your followers. Why do you look at me with such love?" His smile was gentle as he knelt beside me, bringing his face level with mine. "Hiroshi, I am not your enemy. I never was. I died for you too, my precious son. I died for every Japanese soldier, just as I died for every American soldier. I died for your emperor, and I died for the farmers and the mothers and the children who never held a weapon. Love knows no nationality." The words shattered something deep inside my chest. All my life, I had been taught that the gods cared only for the Japanese people, that we were chosen and special and superior to all other races. Yet here was the God of my enemies telling me that his love extended to me as well, that I was just as precious to him as any American soldier. "But Lord," I protested, "I have killed so many of your people. I have hated them with every fiber of my being. I have served a false god, believing the emperor was divine. How can you love someone who has done such terrible things?" Jesus reached out and gently took my hands in his. His touch was warm and real, more solid than anything I had experienced in that gray realm. "My son, let me show you something that will help you understand." Suddenly, the space around us began to change. The gray mist swirled and formed into vivid scenes that played out before my eyes, like moving pictures. I saw the young American soldier I had killed, but now I saw his whole story. I watched him as a little boy, playing in a backyard in Ohio, laughing as his mother pushed him on a swing. I saw him in school, struggling with mathematics, but excelling at baseball. I watched him receive his draft notice and saw the tears in his mother's eyes as he boarded the train to basic training. "His name was David Thompson," Jesus said softly. "He was 19 years old, just like you were when you first enlisted. He loved his mother's apple pie and hoped to become a teacher when the war was over. He was scared every single day on that battlefield, but he fought because he believed he was protecting his family and his country." The scene shifted, and I saw David's mother receiving the telegram about her son's death. I watched her collapse to her kitchen floor, clutching the yellow paper to her chest as sobs racked her body. I saw his girlfriend Mary reading the letter he had written to her just hours before I killed him. A letter full of love and dreams for their future together. "Look closely, Hiroshi," Jesus said, his voice filled with infinite compassion. "Do you see the difference between her tears and your mother's tears when she learns of your death?" I stared at the scene of David's mother grieving, and the truth hit me like a physical blow. Her tears looked exactly like my mother's tears. Her anguish was identical to what my own family would feel. Her son had died far from home, just like I had. Her heart was broken by war, just like countless Japanese hearts had been broken. "There is no difference," I whispered, the words barely audible. "No difference at all," Jesus confirmed. David Thompson and Hiroshi Tanaka were both young men who loved their families and served their countries. Both were precious to me. Both were caught in a war that turned them into enemies when they should have been brothers. The scenes continued to change around us, showing me American families grieving their sons, American mothers praying for their boys to come home safely, American children growing up without fathers. Every face I saw could have been Japanese. Every tear could have been shed by someone in my own village. This is what I tried to teach when I walked the earth. Jesus continued, "Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Do good to those who hate you. Not because it is easy, but because it is the only way to break the cycle of hatred that destroys my children." I looked up at him, my mind struggling to process this complete reversal of everything I had believed. But Lord, if this is true, then what was I fighting for? What did all those deaths mean? What was the purpose of any of it? His expression grew infinitely sad, and I saw tears begin to form in his eyes. "There was no purpose in the hatred, my son. War sometimes becomes necessary to stop greater evils, but the hatred that fuels it serves no good purpose. You fought because you were told to fight. You killed because you were taught to kill. But now I am teaching you to love. He stood and extended his hand to me. "Come, Hiroshi. Let me show you what real honor looks like. Let me show you what it truly means to serve something greater than yourself." As I took his hand and rose to my feet, I felt something fundamental change inside my heart. The hatred that had driven me for so many years began to dissolve, replaced by a love so powerful and pure that it took my breath away. I was still the same person, but I was also completely transformed, ready to learn truths that would change not just my own eternal destiny, but the lives of countless others who would hear my testimony in the years to come. Now ask yourself this question. When was the last time you looked at someone you considered your enemy and tried to see them as God sees them? As Jesus led me through that realm beyond death, I began to understand that everything I had called honor in my earthly life was nothing more than pride dressed in noble clothes. He showed me visions of what true honor looked like, and it bore no resemblance to the glory I had sought on the battlefield. "Hiroshi," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "you believed that honor came from dying for your emperor, from killing your enemies, from bringing glory to your nation through violence. But let me show you real honor." The gray mist around us swirled again, and I found myself watching scenes that made my heart ache with their beauty. I saw a Japanese mother in Hiroshima sharing her last bowl of rice with a starving Chinese refugee, even though her own children were hungry. I watched an American soldier on Okinawa risk his life to carry a wounded Japanese civilian to safety, knowing that others might call him a traitor for showing mercy to the enemy. I witnessed a German doctor in a prison camp treating Allied prisoners with the same care he showed his own countrymen. "This is honor," Jesus explained. "Not the taking of life, but the preserving of it. Not the destruction of your enemies, but the recognition that your enemies are also my children. True honor comes from serving love rather than hatred, from building rather than destroying, from healing rather than wounding." The weight of this revelation crushed me. I had spent my entire adult life pursuing a false version of honor, believing that my worth as a man was measured by how many enemies I could kill, how bravely I could die for my emperor. Now I saw that every act of violence I had committed, every moment of hatred I had harbored, every death I had caused, had moved me further away from true honor rather than closer to it. "But Lord," I cried out in anguish, "if what you say is true, then I have lived my entire life in service to evil. Every man I killed, every order I followed, every moment of pride I felt in my military service was a betrayal of what honor really means." Jesus stopped walking and turned to face me, his eyes filled with infinite compassion. "Yes, my son, that is the weight you must carry. But it is not a weight meant to crush you. It is meant to transform you." He reached out and placed his hands on my shoulders, and I felt a warmth flow through me, unlike anything I had ever experienced. "Do you remember the story of Paul, who persecuted my followers before becoming my greatest apostle? Do you know of the thief on the cross, who spent his life taking from others before finding redemption in his final moments? Your past does not disqualify you from serving me, Hiroshi. It qualifies you to understand the depth of my forgiveness." The scenes around us changed again, and I began to see the faces of every American soldier I had killed. But now I saw them not as enemies, but as Jesus saw them, as beloved sons, fathers, brothers, friends. I saw David Thompson teaching children in a classroom that would never exist. I saw Robert Martinez playing guitar on a porch in Texas, surrounded by grandchildren he would never meet. I saw William O'Connor building houses with his strong hands, creating homes for families while his own family mourned his absence. Each face was accompanied by Jesus' overwhelming love for that person, and I felt that love flooding through my own heart. The hatred I had carried for these men transformed into grief for their loss, sorrow for their families,
and a desperate wish that I could undo every act of violence I had committed. I understand now, I whispered through tears that seemed to come from the very depths of my soul. They were not demons. They were your children, just as I am your child. I have been fighting against my own brothers. Yes, Jesus said simply. And now you understand why I must send you back. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. Send me back? But Lord, I am dead? My body lies bleeding on the sands of Iwo Jima? Jesus smiled, and in that smile, I saw both infinite love and infinite sadness. Death is not the end for those I choose to serve me. You have work to do, my son, a mission that only you can fulfill. Fear gripped my heart, not fear of death, but fear of the magnitude of what he was asking. What work, Lord? What could I possibly do? You will return to life, but you will not return as the same man who died. You will carry my love in your heart where hatred once lived. You will speak my truth where lies once reigned. You will be my witness among the warriors, my voice calling for peace in the midst of war. The impossibility of such a mission overwhelmed me. Lord, they will never listen to me. My own soldiers will think I have gone mad. The officers will have me executed for treason. How can one man stand against an entire war? Jesus began walking again, leading me toward a light that seemed to grow brighter with each step. You will not be alone, Hiroshi. I will be with you every moment. My love will give you strength when your own strength fails. My words will flow through your mouth when you do not know what to say. And most importantly, the truth you speak will have power, because you have experienced it yourself. As we walked, he continued to explain the mission he was giving me. You will speak to the Japanese soldiers first, telling them what you have learned about true honor. Some will reject you, some will want to silence you, but others will listen. Their hearts will be prepared to hear truth, because they are as weary of killing as you once were. But how will they believe me? I asked. What proof can I offer that what I say is true? The proof will be in your transformation, Jesus replied. Men who knew you as a killer will see you as a peacemaker. They will witness love flowing from a heart that once held only hatred. That kind of change cannot be faked or explained away. It can only come from divine intervention. He paused and looked directly into my eyes. But I must warn you, my son, this path will not be easy. Many will reject your message. Some will call you a traitor, a coward, a madman. You will face imprisonment, torture, possibly even death. Your own family may turn away from you. The very soldiers you try to save may be the ones who condemn you. The weight of his warning settled on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Yet somehow, in the presence of his perfect love, even the promise of suffering could not diminish my resolve. If you are with me, Lord, then I can face anything. The love I feel now is stronger than any hatred I ever carried. If this love can transform my heart, it can transform others as well. Jesus smiled again, and this time the sadness in his expression was mixed with pride and joy. This is why I chose you, Hiroshi. Not because you were good, but because you were lost. Not because you were righteous, but because you were broken. The most powerful testimonies come from those who have experienced the greatest transformations. He touched my forehead gently, and I felt his love pouring into every corner of my being, filling spaces I had not even known were empty. Go back, my son. Live not for an earthly emperor, but for the King of Kings. Fight not against flesh and blood, but against the spiritual forces of hatred and division that turn brothers into enemies. Your true war begins now. So I ask you, just as a soldier would ask another, are you ready to fight the real enemy? The enemy is not the person who looks different from you, speaks a different language, or follows a different flag. The real enemy is the hatred in our own hearts, the pride that makes us believe we are better than others, the fear that turns love into violence.
Are you ready to take up arms against that enemy? The sensation of returning to life was unlike anything I could have imagined.
One moment I was standing in the presence of Jesus, filled with his love and commissioned with his mission. And the next moment I was gasping for air as consciousness flooded back into my physical body.
The transition was jarring and violent, like being thrown from a peaceful dream into a nightmare of pain and confusion. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on a stretcher inside what I immediately recognized as an American field hospital. Canvas walls surrounded me, and the air was thick with the smells of antiseptic, blood, and death. American voices filled the space around me, speaking in urgent, clipped tones about medical procedures I could not understand. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating, that somehow the afterlife experience had been a fever dream brought on by blood loss. But then I tried to move,
and the reality of my situation became undeniably clear. My chest was wrapped in bandages, and every breath sent sharp pains through my ribcage, where the bullet had torn through my lung. My body was real, the pain was real, and I was somehow, impossibly, alive. Yet the man who had awakened in that hospital bed was not the same man who had died on the volcanic sands of Iwo Jima. The hatred was simply gone. The burning rage that had fueled my every action for 3 years of war had been completely extinguished, replaced by an overwhelming love that seemed to radiate from the very core of my being. I looked around at the American medics, working frantically to save wounded soldiers, and instead of seeing demons and enemies, I saw brothers. I saw young men far from home, scared and exhausted, doing their best to preserve life in the midst of unimaginable carnage. When the first American medic approached my stretcher to check my vital signs, I reached out and gently grasped his wrist. He tensed, probably expecting an attack from the enemy soldier who had just regained consciousness. But instead, I looked into his eyes and whispered in broken English, "Thank you. Thank you for saving my life." The young medic stared at me in shock. His name tag read Johnson, and I could see that he was probably no older than 21. His hands were stained with blood from treating countless wounded soldiers, and his eyes carried the haunted look of someone who had seen too much death. He pulled his wrist free from my grip and stepped back, his expression confused and wary. "You're the Jap sergeant we pulled out of the crater," he said, his voice uncertain. "You were dead, man. No pulse, no breathing, nothing. We worked on you for almost 10 minutes before you came back." I tried to sit up, though the movement sent waves of pain through my chest. "I was dead," I confirmed, my English still holding, but clear. "But God sent me back. Jesus Christ sent me back to tell you something important." Johnson's eyes widened, and he glanced nervously at the other medics nearby. I could see him wondering if the Japanese soldier had suffered brain damage, if the lack of oxygen during those minutes of death had driven me insane. But I pressed on, driven by the mission Jesus had given me. "I know you think I am crazy," I continued, struggling with the unfamiliar language, but determined to communicate. "But I must tell you. I saw your friend David Thompson, the boy from Ohio. I killed him 2 days ago, and I'm sorry. So sorry." The effect of my words was immediate and dramatic. Johnson's face went pale, and his hands began to shake. David Thompson had been his friend, his bunkmate, someone he had grown up with in the same small Ohio town. The fact that this enemy soldier not only knew David's name, but was expressing genuine remorse for his death, was incomprehensible to him. "How do you know about David?" Johnson whispered, his voice barely audible above the sounds of the busy field hospital. "I saw him," I replied, tears beginning to flow down my cheeks. "I saw him in the place between life and death. He forgave me. He told me his story, about his mother, about Mary, about his dreams. Jesus showed me that he was not my enemy. He was my brother. Word of the strange Japanese sergeant who had returned from the dead began to spread through the medical unit. Other American soldiers gathered around my stretcher, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Many had lost friends to Japanese soldiers like me, and my presence among them was a source of tension and confusion. But I continued to share what I had experienced, speaking to anyone who would listen about my encounter with Jesus and the transformation of my heart. I told them about the love that had replaced hatred, about the mission I had been given to spread peace instead of war. Some dismissed me as delusional, but others sensed something genuine in my testimony, something that could not be explained by injury or trauma. The physical recovery was slow and painful, but the spiritual healing that had occurred in those 7 minutes of death continued to manifest itself in ways that amazed everyone around me. Where once I had been filled with pride and arrogance, now I was humble and gentle. Where once I had spoken of honor through death, now I spoke of honor through love. The change was so complete and so dramatic that even the most skeptical observers could not deny that something extraordinary had happened. As my strength began to return, I was transferred to a prisoner of war facility where captured Japanese soldiers were being held, pending the end of hostilities. This was where my real mission would begin, where I would have the opportunity to share Christ's message of peace with my fellow warriors who were still trapped in the same hatred and deception that had once consumed me. The other Japanese prisoners viewed my arrival with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They had heard rumors about the sergeant who had died and come back to life, who was now speaking of love for the Americans and claiming to have met the Christian God. Many assumed I had been brainwashed by my captors, or that I was playing some elaborate game to gain better treatment. But when I began to share my testimony with them, speaking in our native language about the encounter that had changed everything, some began to listen with growing attention. These were men who had seen enough death and suffering to be open to the possibility that there might be a better way, that the endless cycle of hatred and violence might not be the only path available to us. I started with private conversations, speaking quietly to individual soldiers about what I had experienced. I told them about Jesus' love for Japanese people, about his desire for peace between all nations, about the true honor that comes from preserving life rather than taking it. The responses varied widely. Some men rejected my message immediately, calling me a traitor and a fool. Others listened politely, but remained unconvinced. But a few, a precious few, began to ask deeper questions. Private Yamamoto was the first to truly embrace the message I was sharing. He was a young man from Osaka who had lost his entire family in the bombing raids and had joined the army seeking revenge against the Americans. But as I shared the story of David Thompson and the love that Jesus had shown for both American and Japanese souls, I saw something change in Yamamoto's eyes. "Sergeant," he said quietly after I had finished speaking, "if what you say is true, then everything we have been fighting for is meaningless. All the death, all the suffering, all the hatred, it has all been for nothing." "Not for nothing," I replied gently. "It has brought us to this moment, to this understanding. God can use even our mistakes, even our sins, to teach us His truth. The question is not what we have done in the past, but what we will do with the truth we have now." Every breath felt like a gift, every heartbeat like a miracle, because I knew I was living on borrowed time, time given to me by Jesus Christ, for a specific purpose. The man who had died, believing that honor came through killing, had been replaced by someone who understood that true honor comes through loving, even loving one's enemies. Within weeks of sharing my testimony with Private Yamamoto, word of our secret meetings began to spread through the prisoner of war camp like wildfire. What started as quiet conversations between two men had grown into an underground movement that challenged everything the Imperial Japanese Army stood for. Men who had been trained to die for the emperor were now questioning whether dying for love might be a greater honor. Yamamoto became my first true convert, and his transformation was as dramatic as my own had been. He had joined the army, burning with hatred for the Americans who had killed his family. But after hearing about Jesus' love for all people, that hatred began to melt away. He started reaching out to other prisoners, carefully selecting men who seemed weary of war, who had grown tired of the endless cycle of violence and death. Our meetings had to be conducted in absolute secrecy. The camp was still under Japanese military discipline, even though we were prisoners, and any hint of what the officers would consider treasonous behavior could result in immediate execution. We gathered in groups of 3 or 4, usually during the evening meal, when the noise of conversation would mask our whispered discussions about peace and forgiveness. I began each gathering the same way, with my personal testimony about dying and meeting Jesus Christ. I would describe in detail the love I had felt in his presence, the way he had shown me the humanity of our American enemies, the mission he had given me to spread peace instead of war. Some men listened with skepticism, others with growing wonder, but all of them listened because they could see the genuine transformation in my life. The first man to lay down his weapons was Corporal Nakamura, a career soldier who had served the emperor for 15 years. During one of our secret meetings, as I finished describing Jesus' command to love our enemies, Nakamura stood up with tears in his eyes and declared that he would never again raise a weapon against another human being. The other men in our group stared at him in shock, understanding the magnitude of what he was saying. "If Sergeant Tanaka is right," Nakamura said, his voice shaking with emotion, "then every American I have killed was a brother I murdered in ignorance. I cannot continue to serve a cause that turns God's children against each other. From this moment forward, I serve only the Prince of Peace." Word of Nakamura's decision spread quickly through our growing network. Within days, 3 other soldiers had made similar commitments, publicly refusing to participate in military drills and declaring their intention to follow Christ's teachings of love and nonviolence. The camp officers were baffled and furious. They could not understand how their most loyal soldiers were suddenly embracing what they saw as foreign weakness and treason. The dangerous nature of our advocacy became clear when Sergeant Major Ishida, the highest-ranking Japanese officer in the camp, called me to his quarters for interrogation. Ishida was a traditionalist, a man who still believed completely in the divine nature of the emperor and the righteousness of our cause. He had heard rumors about my activities and was determined to put a stop to what he saw as dangerous heresy. "Tanaka," he said, his voice cold with authority, "I have reports that you are spreading Christian propaganda among the men, that you are encouraging them to abandon their duty to the emperor. Is this true?" I looked into his eyes, remembering how I had once shared his unquestioning loyalty to the imperial system, and felt nothing but compassion for his spiritual blindness. "Sir, I am sharing the truth that Jesus Christ revealed to me when I died. I am telling the men that there is a greater honor than dying for any earthly ruler. I am teaching them to love instead of hate." Ishida's face flushed red with anger. "You speak blasphemy. The emperor is divine, descended from the gods themselves. There is no higher honor than serving him, no greater purpose than dying for his glory. You have been brainwashed by the enemy, and now you seek to poison the minds of other loyal soldiers." "With respect, sir," I replied calmly, "I have been set free from brainwashing, not subjected to it. I spent 24 years believing lies about the emperor's divinity and the righteousness of hatred. It took dying and meeting the true God to open my eyes to reality." The interrogation continued for hours, with Ishida alternating between threats and attempts at reasoning.
He promised me better treatment if I would renounce my Christian beliefs and return to imperial orthodoxy. When that failed, he threatened me with execution for treason and sedition. But I had already died once, and the love of Christ burning in my heart made all earthly threats meaningless. "You may kill this body," I told him finally, "but you cannot kill the truth I carry. Jesus Christ died for every man in this camp, including you, Sergeant Major. His love is stronger than any emperor's power, and his truth will continue to spread regardless of what happens to me." 3 times over the following weeks, military police came for me in the middle of the night, dragging me away for interrogation and punishment. They beat me with bamboo rods, trying to force me to recant my testimony and identify the other men who were participating in our peace movement. But each beating only strengthened my resolve, because I remembered Jesus' words about the cost of following him. The miracle was that each time they released me, more soldiers approached me, wanting to hear about the love that could sustain someone through such suffering. The very persecution meant to silence our movement became its greatest advertisement. Men who had initially been skeptical began to wonder what kind of truth could inspire such courage in the face of torture. Our underground network grew to include over 30 soldiers from various units. We developed a system of coded communications using biblical phrases disguised as ordinary conversation to identify fellow believers and arrange meetings. The phrase, "the cherry blossoms are beautiful this year," became our way of saying that Jesus' love was present even in the darkest circumstances. The most dangerous moment came when we learned that some of our number were planning to formally refuse orders. When the camp was mobilized for a final defensive action, word had reached us that American forces were preparing for an invasion of the Japanese mainland, and our camp was being organized as part of the last-ditch resistance. Several of the men who had embraced Christ's message of peace declared their intention to lay down their weapons publicly, rather than participate in more killing. I knew this would mean certain execution, not just for them, but potentially for all of us who had been spreading the message of peace. That night, I gathered our core group of believers for what might be our final meeting. I looked into the faces of men who had become my spiritual brothers, men who had been transformed by the same love that had changed my heart. "Brothers," I said, "we face a choice that may cost us our lives. We can continue to hide our faith, continue to serve the empire while secretly following Christ, or we can stand openly for the truth, regardless of the consequences. Each man must decide for himself what honor truly means." One by one, the men in that circle declared their willingness to die rather than kill again. They had tasted the love of Christ, and they could not return to the hatred that had once defined their lives. As I looked at their faces, I saw the same transformation that had occurred in my own heart reflected in theirs. The war ended before we had to make that final sacrifice, but the movement we had started continued to grow. When Japan surrendered and the prisoners were released, many of the men who had heard my testimony carried the message of Christ's love back to their families and communities. What had begun with one man's encounter with Jesus in the space between life and death became a network of peace that touched hundreds of lives. Today, 7 years after my death and resurrection, I continue to share this testimony with anyone who will listen. I speak at churches, at veteran gatherings, at any place where people are willing to hear about the love that conquered my hatred. I have helped over 200 families, both Japanese and American, find peace with their wartime losses through the forgiveness that only Christ can provide. But my work is not finished, and neither is yours. Look inside your own heart right now. Who do you consider your enemy? What hatred are you nursing? What prejudice are you harboring? What wounds are you refusing to let heal? The same Jesus who transformed a Japanese soldier's heart
can transform yours as well. I died a warrior for the Emperor and came back a servant of the Prince of Peace. That 7 minutes and 23 seconds of death changed everything, not just for me, but for everyone whose life I've been able to touch since then. My death was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of my real purpose. If a Japanese soldier who killed 17 Americans can learn to love his enemies, what excuse do any of us have for holding on to hatred? The choice is before you now, just as it was before me in that gray realm between life and death. Will you choose love? Or will you choose to remain enslaved by the hatred that destroys both the one who hates and the one who is hated? The war may be over, but the battle for human hearts continues every day. I am still fighting, but now I fight with love instead of bullets, with truth instead of lies, with hope instead of despair. This is my testimony. This is my mission. And this is my invitation to you to join the only army that truly matters, the army of those who have been conquered by divine love.